On Zombie Reddit, today's story is:
My wife cheated on me on her business trip and her therapist was a friend who ruined marriages. It all started about 6 months ago. Sarah returned from her company's annual retreat completely transformed. These events, organized by her manager to strengthen team ties, used to energize her and fill her with anecdotes about her colleagues. This time it was different. Since her return, she had shown a noticeable distance. She hardly mentioned any details of the trip, something unusual for her. When I tried to find out if something had happened, she would simply shake her head and dismiss my concerns. At first, I attributed her behavior to typical post-trip fatigue. I thought that perhaps the excess of socializing and group activities had exhausted her. However, after several days, her attitude not only persisted but worsened. Sarah began to be irritable with me, starting arguments over trivial matters that she would not have even noticed before. Our relationship, characterized by harmony, was suddenly enveloped in tension. Every comment that had previously made her laugh now triggered sighs of frustration or confrontation. We had a tradition of going out on a weekly date. It was nothing extraordinary, maybe a coffee or a walk in the park. These moments represented little oases where we could reconnect away from the stress of everyday life. But Sarah began to cancel these meetings with increasingly unconvincing excuses. She claimed to be exhausted or overworked, even at weekends. The cancellations accumulated along with my concern, deeply missing our connection in moments of complicity. Her emotional fluctuations intensified. She could be calm one moment and the next become distant and moody, completely isolating herself. My mind began to wander towards disturbing possibilities. I worried that she had stopped loving me or, even worse, that she had fallen in love with someone else. I hated to consider these options, but her behavior was so unusual that I began to contemplate previously unthinkable scenarios. When I finally expressed my fears, Sarah was adamant in denying them, repeatedly swearing that there was no one else. She even questioned my rationality, suggesting that I was exaggerating for no reason and that I just needed space to resolve personal issues. I decided to give her that space, hoping that whatever situation she was going through would resolve itself naturally. I thought that by avoiding putting pressure on her and allowing her to breathe, things would eventually return to normal. Unfortunately, the opposite happened. The more space I gave her, the more she withdrew. Her working hours became longer. She arrived later and later, frequently after I had gone to bed. Before, she used to share details of her day, telling funny anecdotes about her colleagues or letting off steam about office tensions. Now, I was met with silence when she returned. She became evasive when I asked her questions, which led to growing doubts in my mind. With our relationship deteriorating, I suggested couples therapy. I thought a professional could help us identify the source of our distance. Surprisingly, Sarah rejected the idea, preferring to seek individual therapy before addressing our joint problems. Although it was not my initial expectation, I agreed, prioritizing her well-being. Sarah quickly found a therapist and began 2-hour sessions every 3 weeks. I did not question her choices, trusting her judgment in selecting professional help. My only wish was that she would find the clarity necessary to eventually reconnect with me. After each session, she seemed lighter, as if freed from a weight. I hoped this would signal an improvement in our relationship, the beginning of a new stage together. However, the situation became stranger. Sarah increased the amount of time she spent away from home, making plans that systematically excluded me. It started occasionally, but soon became a regular feature of every weekend. She would leave without giving detailed explanations and return late at night. I was not opposed to her socializing independently. I had always encouraged her to maintain her autonomy outside of marriage. However, I had hoped to at least be kept informed. Her frequent and unexplained absences made me feel marginalized in my own marriage, while she seemed indifferent to how much I missed our closeness. The concern intensified when I discovered, almost accidentally, that Sarah not only socialized with friends during these outings. Apparently, she also interacted with strangers in bars, something she had never mentioned. I found out when several concerned friends contacted me. They had seen her dancing with unknown men, visibly intoxicated and acting in a way that was not like her. They recognized her as my wife, and it was humiliating to learn about Sarah's behavior from third parties while I remained unaware of the situation. When I confronted her, seeking an honest conversation about the events, she dismissed my concerns, arguing that she was just having fun and that dancing or talking to strangers did not imply inappropriate behavior. She presented it as if meeting these strangers was harmless, as if I should not be affected by this version of her that I barely recognized. Later, she abandoned her domestic responsibilities. Since we both started working, we always divided the housework equally. I was in charge of the kitchen and preparing lunch every day, while Sarah took care of the dishes. the dishwasher and the laundry, leaving me with the folding of clothes and the maintenance of the garden. This system of shared responsibility always worked efficiently, until Sarah suddenly neglected her duties. She began to complain of feeling oppressed by the domestic tasks, comparing her situation with friends who apparently did not face such demands. Our dynamic was always based on mutual effort, allowing us to develop our careers while maintaining a functional home. Her sudden frustration seemed incongruent with her previous personality. I tried to understand her perspective but pointed out that her references, mainly housewives in the neighborhood, dedicated full time to domestic administration. I offered to quit my job if she felt overburdened, offering myself as sole breadwinner. Alternatively, if she preferred to keep her job, I needed to understand the need to share domestic responsibilities, especially considering that I never complained about my tasks. Sarah insisted on abandoning the domestic tasks, arguing that her work responsibilities were too demanding for her to also take care of the home. She asked me to assume all the responsibilities until she felt ready to resume them. Since then, I have individually managed all the household chores, cooking, cleaning, laundry, and general maintenance. I hoped that she would eventually appreciate my efforts, but my dedication has gone unrecognized. 2 months ago, I discovered that Sarah had been spreading scandalous allegations about me in the neighborhood. I found out through close friends whose wives frequented Sarah. These longtime friends expressed concern about her statements. Apparently, she described me as controlling and toxic, claiming that I limited her freedom. When some neighbors inquired about specific details, Sarah argued that she had discovered my closed and restrictive mentality over the years, causing her marital dissatisfaction. Consequently, she had begun to interact with other men to reconnect with aspects of herself supposedly suppressed after our marriage. She also shared fantasies with her friends about exploring her femininity with other men. Initially I refused to believe it. This completely contradicted Sarah's personality, who had always been reserved about our relationship and avoided sharing personal problems, especially with mutual friends. Besides, why would she make up such lies? I had never restricted her freedom. On the contrary, for months I had silently tolerated her behavior. Now, inexplicably, she accused me of toxicity and repression. I confronted her directly about my friend's revelations, seeking her version of events and her motives for sharing such statements. Surprisingly, Sarah did not deny anything. She calmly admitted to having shared these feelings, explaining that her dissatisfaction and insecurity about our relationship had led her to vent to others. When I asked for clarification, Sarah began to talk about her therapy sessions, describing how her therapist had helped her to identify the lack of emotion in her life. She expressed it with a strangely detached tone. She characterized me as boring and predictable, pointing out that our marriage lacked passion. These words hurt especially because I had always assumed that she was satisfied with our shared life. I reminded her of the many times she had expressed happiness in our joint effort to maintain a balanced relationship. Instead of understanding me, she accused me of suffocating her. She insisted that while she had evolved by keeping up to date, I had remained stagnant, causing our disconnection. My mind was racing as I asked her directly what she wanted from our marriage. After some nervous hesitation, she admitted that she and her therapist were considering an open marriage as a solution to revitalize our relationship. I was stunned and expressed my categorical rejection of this proposal. Sarah argued that, regardless of my position, she believed in it. She maintained that opening our relationship could restore the lost emotion, allowing her to rediscover herself while maintaining our marriage. She added that my discomfort with casual encounters was acceptable, but she wanted that freedom without guilt. Her suggestion left me perplexed, barely processing her words. I never imagined that our relationship would reach the point where I needed to seek satisfaction externally. How could associating with strangers while remaining married improve our situation? Besides, what kind of therapist would recommend this? I thought I was seeking professional help to improve, but apparently I was only receiving encouragement for these far-fetched ideas. I told her that if she wanted a divorce, she didn't need to invent narratives about excitement or novelty. I suggested that if she was so unhappy, she could simply express it honestly instead of justifying an open marriage. I preferred separation to maintaining a marriage with permitted infidelities. This fundamentally contradicted my conception of marriage and was unacceptable. Surprisingly, Sarah resisted, stating that she valued our union. She emphasized her appreciation for my reliability and stability as a partner. However, she simultaneously argued that our spark had been extinguished and insisted that we could maintain the marriage while having relationships with others. She argued that this new dynamic would benefit and revitalize our relationship. I asked for time to reflect, recognizing the gravity of the decision. Over the next few days, as I deeply analyzed our relationship, I confirmed my rejection of open marriage. More significantly, I rejected who Sarah had become. Gradually, she had transformed herself beyond recognition. Her dress changed dramatically, becoming more provocative. She was constantly absorbed in her phone, immersed in conversations with others. She had adopted a completely different lifestyle, incompatible with our shared values. She barely interacted with me and had completely abandoned her role in domestic maintenance. She treated me as a simple housemate, not as a partner. I gradually understood that I did not want this version of my wife. I rejected a partner who needed to relate to others in order to feel fulfilled. I had devoted months to patience, support and respect for her space. But the Sarah I loved had disappeared, replaced by someone who considered our relationship a mere convenience. It hurt deeply, but I recognized the need to end our marriage. I had exhausted my resources, but they were clearly insufficient. After 2 weeks of careful reflection, I informed Sarah of my decision to divorce, explaining my reasons in detail and asking her not to object. However, she reacted with anger, accusing me of hypersensitivity and considering divorce an extreme response. She did not understand my refusal to adapt to the new lifestyle she proposed. I remained calm, explaining that I was simply rejecting this proposal. My refusal to force myself to accept it only intensified her anger. Sarah then redirected her narrative, accusing me of abandoning our marriage and pointing to me as the real problem. Her strategy did not surprise me, given her history of manipulation to generate doubts in me and evade responsibility. I tried to reason with her without success. Recognizing the stalemate, I asked her to leave, justifying my request on the grounds that she was my property. Sarah reacted violently, denying my right to expel her and threatening to ruin my life if I went ahead with the divorce. Her hostility reinforced my determination. I warned against further escalation of the situation. She finally gave in, but not before expressing her anger by destroying objects and scratching my vehicle as she left. I prudently documented everything, including photographic evidence and a record of her outbursts, in anticipation of a possible future need. This painful and bitter end marked the decline of a once meaningful relationship. Since her departure, Sarah has been sending me messages insulting my masculinity and spreading rumors around town, telling anyone who will listen that I wrongfully expelled her and calling me a coward for not fighting for our marriage. Am I the bad guy? Update 1. I appreciate your sympathetic comments. I'm not naive. I now understand that there was probably infidelity, perhaps multiple, motivating her suggestion to open our marriage. Evidently, she was only seeking to maintain the benefits of being married to someone stable like me without really contributing to the relationship. As for the reason, it could be that true love never existed or that her feelings gradually faded. At this point, it is irrelevant. Sarah continues to send me voice messages blaming me for everything. I am exhausted from her constant accusations. Update 2. It has been 2 weeks since my last update. Over the past week, Sarah repeatedly insisted on meeting, sending messages and calling, so I finally agreed to see her today. Part of me hoped that she had reconsidered, perhaps ready for an honest conversation and possibly to take responsibility for what had happened. However, as soon as we sat down, she presented a new narrative, explaining that her therapist believed that I had left our marriage simply because we were having difficulties. According to the therapist, I had failed to fulfill my commitment by rejecting his requests. Sarah went on to mention that she was willing to take me back, provided I agreed to certain conditions. I was baffled by her approach. What did she mean by taking me back when I had filed for divorce? Out of curiosity, I inquired about her conditions. Sarah demanded that I agree to an open marriage and allow her to quit her job so that she could live without financial worries. Listening to her, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. At first I thought she was joking. How could she make these outrageous demands after everything that had happened? Did she really think I would consider these proposals after her recent behavior? Her absolute lack of self-awareness was astonishing. I then informed her that I would never agree to such absurd demands because I was completely fed up with our marriage. I revealed that I had already consulted a lawyer and started the divorce process. Her face turned pale with astonishment. Her tone abruptly changed from indignation to pleading. She asked if I was really leaving her. I nodded. There was nothing salvageable left in our marriage and I had exhausted my attempts at reconciliation with someone so out of touch with reality and unwilling to compromise. Surprisingly, Sarah burst into tears. This reaction took me by surprise, as it was the last thing I expected. I kindly asked her to calm down and questioned the reason for her reaction. That is to say, was she really surprised by my decision when she should have anticipated it? Watching her cry, I began to suspect that there was something deeper going on. I asked her sincerely about any additional factors that might explain her strange behavior over the last few months. Then Sarah finally revealed the truth. She explained that approximately a year ago she had reconnected with a former high school classmate named Elena during their school reunion. Elena proclaimed herself a guru of social media relationships. According to Sarah, they both began to see each other more often, reviving their friendship through long conversations and regular meetings. She admitted that Elena gradually became a significant influence in her life. It was Elena, Sarah revealed, who first pointed out her apparent marital unhappiness and began to question her about me and our relationship. Sarah confessed that while she shared details about us and our life together, Elena frequently criticized our marriage, describing it as suffocating and restrictive. Elena constantly reminded Sarah of her fun-loving and adventurous personality during high school, when she had multiple relationships, regretting that she had now become boring. This generated resentment in Sarah towards me, blaming me for her personal transformation. She felt that she had lost her identity in the marriage and, instead of taking responsibility for her decisions, she projected that frustration onto me. Gradually, this resentment built up and she began to distance herself emotionally, convinced that I was preventing her from living the life she had imagined. Over time, Elena also persuaded Sarah that the only way to reconnect with her true self was to free herself from inhibitions and relate more freely to strangers. When Sarah's work trip came up 7 months ago, Elena encouraged her to take the opportunity to let go and flirt with male colleagues, arguing that physical distance justified experimentation. Sarah then confessed to having kissed someone during her work trip, although she omitted his identity. She explained that after returning, guilt overwhelmed her but she was afraid to reveal the truth. However, Elena celebrated her behavior and encouraged her to venture beyond our marriage. Sarah admitted that when she started frequenting clubs and receiving male attention, she experienced a validation that excited her. The euphoria captivated her and she began to pursue that feeling. All this time she recognized the impropriety of her actions, but she felt unable to stop. Therefore, when I suggested couples therapy, she feared giving in and confessing the truth, anticipating that it would lead to our separation. Consequently, she chose to seek individual therapy to cover up her actions. The supposed therapeutic sessions were simply meetings with Elena where they would chat and let off steam. Sarah admitted her deep trust in Elena, based on years of friendship and the conviction that she knew her better than anyone else. Gradually, Elena's influence intensified until Sarah completely internalized her suggestions. She deserved freedom and excitement without considering the consequences. Every time I expressed concerns, Elena convinced Sarah that I acted controlling and toxic, hindering her authenticity. In fact, Elena inspired the proposal of open marriage, anticipating my acceptance, but surprisingly met with my rejection and expulsion. Sarah explained that she had considered confessing later, but Elena persuaded her to maintain control of the situation and provoke me into pursuing her. For this reason, Elena strongly advised avoiding apologies, insisting instead on demanding her desires. However, Elena's suggestions failed again and my determination for divorce seemed unshakable, finally motivating her confession. Sarah begged me not to abandon her. She acknowledged having temporarily lost her mind, admitting that Elena's influence had clouded her judgment. She explained that her friend's reputation as a relationship guru had legitimized her advice. However, clearly this had been counterproductive. After her full confession, Sarah expressed a willingness to seek legitimate therapy and, if I agreed, to participate in joint therapy. I could sense her desperation for one last chance to rebuild our relationship, promising to make every effort to make up for it, but I had closed that door. Elena had clearly influenced my wife's perspective, but she was not the only problem. Sarah had also been a willing accomplice. She had made conscious and deliberate decisions. For months, she could have saved our relationship through a frank discussion about her feelings as adults, but she chose to repress everything and allow Elena's toxic advice to influence her. She had manipulated me, deceived me and dismissed my feelings while pretending normality. What's more, she had been unfaithful and now, too late, she was only admitting the truth out of desperation. I firmly told her that her confession did not alter my decision. Although I felt some empathy for her revelations, I could not ignore my revulsion towards her transformation. The pain, the lies and the betrayal could not simply be erased. She clearly needed professional help to resolve her personal conflicts. I offered to help her find a legitimate therapist who could assist her with her individual problems, but that was the limit of my support. Later, when we said goodbye after the meeting, she seemed genuinely guilty and remorseful, but I was no longer affected. Update 3. Can you believe it? Last night, after my meeting with Sarah, insomnia led me to investigate Elena on social networks, intrigued to meet this woman whose friendship my wife had deliberately hidden for months. I admit to having gone too far in my investigation because I discovered that Elena and I shared a mutual acquaintance, a classmate from university. I decided to contact him to find out more about her. According to him, Elena has a history of destroying homes. She has had multiple affairs during her university and professional life, all with married men. Elena always aspired to an early marriage to a wealthy man so she wouldn't have to work. After university, she quickly found an older, wealthy candidate and married him in haste. However, she continued her secret affairs. When her husband found out, he abandoned her. Elena remained indifferent, focusing solely on securing substantial alimony during the divorce. Subsequently, she established her presence on social networks, calling herself a relationship guru. Having learned her story, her toxicity as an influence is evident. It is no longer surprising that she provided erroneous advice to Sarah, contributing to the destruction of our marriage. Update 4. A month has passed since my last update. For those who are wondering, I did have a more detailed conversation with Sarah about Elena's history. It turns out that my ex was completely unaware of Elena's history of infidelity, and was surprised that his supposed friend never shared these details. Let's be clear, I hold Sarah even more responsible than Elena. Evidently, Sarah only needed an excuse for her inappropriate behavior during our marriage, and Elena simply paved the way. Sarah admitted to feeling humiliated to discover that her friend had deceived and manipulated her for months. I replied that it was now irrelevant and advised her to use more discernment when following other people's suggestions in the future. Having admitted everything, my only interest was to finalize the divorce and get on with my life. Finally, Sarah agreed to the separation. According to our legal representatives, the process should be relatively straightforward considering the absence of joint property or children.